my iPhone app, on my iPhone, the Bible app, you can search keywords. And so I just plugged in rain to see what the Bible had to say about rain. And I've probably read this passage before, but I was just overcome. I mean, so much, I started tweeting these verses on Twitter because it was moving me. And I'm not going to read the whole passage. There's 34 verses here, but I'm just going to read some of the verses that hit me as a naturalist. And then we'll go through what may have been hitting you and some of these other categories. But let me just read what in the book of Job is expressed about God and rain. It says, "Behold, God is exalted, and we do not know him. The number of his years is unsearchable. For he draws up the drops of water. They distill rain from the mist, which the clouds pour down. They drip upon man abundantly. Can anyone understand the spreading of the clouds, the thundering of his pavilion? Behold, he spreads his lightning about him, and he covers the depths of the sea. He covers his hands with lightning and commands it to strike the mark. At this also my heart trembles and leaps from its place. Listen closely to the thunder of his voice and the rumbling that goes out from his mouth. Under the whole heaven he lets it loose, and his lightning to the ends of the earth. After it a voice roars. He thunders with his majestic voice, and he does not restrain the lightnings when his voice is heard. God thunders with his voice wondrously, doing great things which we cannot comprehend. For to the snow he says, fall on the earth, and to the downpour and rain, be strong. Listen to this, O Job. Stand and consider the wonders of God. Do you know how God establishes them and makes the lightning of his cloud to shine? Teach us, that we shall say to him, we cannot arrange our case because of darkness." And it's interesting to me that God can take something in our natural world and just show up. Right there in my bedroom, it was a worship experience. I felt the pleasure of God. It was a romantic encounter, as if God said, I knew you messed up, but you came and you know, just like when you approach your wife after you've done something wrong, there's a sweetness to that reconciliation that's sometimes even better than the status quo day that you have with her. So for me, and I'm not pushing, because none of these are any more greater than the other. Just like the love languages that we express with our wives, it's not that one of our love languages is any better than another. It's that it's different. And sometimes as guys, it's hard for us to figure that out, because we know what works for us. And as guys who are problem solvers and fixers, we like to repeat the same processes we've seen work in other situations. And so I'm not going to pretend that that's what everybody here has. Just in the one table I heard here, we had almost all of them. So go ahead and pull out the white sheet of paper with the color pictures. You only get one sheet at a time, so enjoy it. Most of this will be for you to take home now that you know what you are and to be able to study. There's verses that Blue Ridge has assigned to each of these to explore more what the Bible has to say about your love language with your fiance and Jesus. But many of you, how many of you were rational or relational? That was your number one, relational. Okay, so we got Tom. It's high for me. You had a tie. Okay. So this is for you, and what you'll see under each of these is it kind of describes what it's like for you, and then there's several verses there of what the Bible says about that, and then there are suggested starters of ways to enrich that, and that's going to be the challenge you'll find at the end of tonight, is how are you taking this knowledge, because it's good to find out, you know, personality tests, whatever, but to take this knowledge and say, how can I leverage this to make my relationship with Christ deeper? How can I look in other people's lives and connect them with other people with the same passion for Christ and that love language, if you will? So we have relationals. These are people who, they feel close to God when they're around other believers, especially other believers who are on fire, if you will. These are people who, and sometimes I'm this way, I struggle to read the Bible by myself, but you put me in a TruthWorks, especially at John's table here, this last go-around I had, and there's something magical that comes alive in us because of that community. Or maybe you might not sing to yourself in the shower, but when you get in a church service, you love to sing with other people. I don't know exactly how that plays out for all of you, but that you see God show up in your relationships with other God followers. The next category here is actually a picture from a First Wednesday from our church, and these are the celebrators. These are people who love to sing, they love to pray, they love to read poetry, they love to say things to God or write poems to Him or express gratitude. They like to dance. This would be my sister. She works in Amped, and she's a dancer. And it's hard to explain to the people we know that what do you do at church? Well, I dance at church. But for her, she just gets stoked to express that. She'll cry. That's how she responds. And I've seen a lot of people that way, especially at like First Wednesdays and Thursdays, and they're in the first part of the worship service. Naturalists, right there, you're looking at the mountain that Woody and I climbed with some others from Blue Ridge. That's my desktop right there. These are people who, as I said, when they're out in nature and they see something, it's more than just, well, that's cool or that takes my breath away. They see the God part of that whole deal. Next is intellectuals. Who had scored highest on intellectuals? Yeah, you finished the test first too. You get extra points for that. I think in many ways Woody would probably fall in this. These are people who, as they learn more about God in studying, that they respond best that way. When they find out new information about God and new parts of His character, new elements of truth in His Word, or study books, or maybe going to seminars or listening to podcasts. That's some of the things we have here for suggested starters is to immerse yourself in environments, not for the sake of knowledge, because that can be a danger. The Bible says knowledge puffs up. But that there's a response to God that happens to that truth. And that's something we talked about this whole series, that worship is a proper response. And so these are different ways that we're responding properly. Next, servers. How many scored highest on servers? Oh, wow. Okay. We got a big group here. This is my lowest score. So I'm really, I look up to you guys for this. This can be more than and should be more than just serving at church. If this test for me were just, do you enjoy being on the parking team and serving in that capacity, it would probably be my highest. Where I struggle with serving outside of Blue Ridge is for people who need someone to make a meal, or someone to drive them to the airport, or someone to take them somewhere, or to comfort somebody who's in need and it's an awkward situation. But some of you, and typically your wives, your girlfriends, your sisters, women tend to have this one more than us guys. They tend to have that compassion. You have to be careful with this, that you don't become an enabler, that you just don't keep giving to the point to where that truth doesn't match with the love. The next is activists. This is my wife. You can see this is a picture from the recent missions trip to Nicaragua. These are people who need a cause. And they feel when they're fighting for God, for justice in a situation, in this situation for freedom of the sex slaves, or maybe it's babies who are unborn being killed, maybe it's just for the way that your church is, that you have a passion for other churches to be like that, or different ways that God has impressed on you, go do this. Maybe it's a certain burden for a people group or an age group. There are people at Blue Ridge who just have a passion for working with middle school or working with high school, working with divorce, working with different life stages, empty nesters, etc. This is where God's giving you a burden for a specific thing, and it overwhelms you that you feel His presence when you're meeting Him there. Was there anybody who was the top out at activists? Tied. Okay. Last one here is contemplatives. These are people who love to get alone and meditate, just absorb, to maybe journal. Some of you who like to journal. How many placed highest on contemplative? Wow. Usually people who are high in the worship or worship in naturalists, they tend to also carry over to contemplatives. But this is where you just like to dwell on God, pray with Him alone. You like to get alone. The only problem with this is God designed us for community. Most of the verbs and pronouns in the New Testament are plural nouns and verbs. They're meant for us to do things together. So there is a time, like Jesus, when He went up in the mountain to pray, when others went out to be alone. But we need to realize we don't get ourselves outside of community. Many of you in this room have experienced what happens when you're not here, or Saturday morning, or church, what happens when you get out of community. But it's not just that we're different. It can seem like, well, okay, this is a modern culture, and this is how we relate. We're all so fragmented now. But it actually went through the Bible that way. I'm going to give you some examples